Geography and You presents.
Hello and welcome back to the GNY live podcast series. This is the podcast series on the air we fear. Here we explore the critical but under discussed issues of air pollution. I'm your host Hiteshika, and today we are addressing one of the most urgent challenges of our time: the powerful connection between air pollution and climate change. Joining us is not one, but two incredible thought leaders. We have with us Dr. Shulagna Chattopadhyay, the editor in chief, Geography and You, who will guide us in today's conversation. And we are honored to welcome our guest, Professor Sagnik Dey from IIT Delhi, an eminent expert in atmospheric sciences. Professor Dey has many groundbreaking works. However, his involvement with NASA's MAIA mission stands out for me. I find myself keenly interested in the MAIA investigation that seeks to understand how different types of air pollution affect human health. As someone who reflects deeply on my generation's challenges, be it climate change or health crisis, I am keen to explore actionable insights and solutions to these shared global issues. So let's get right into it. Dr. Shulagna Chattopadhyay, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Hiteshika, and welcome, Professor. This is our first interaction, and we are delighted to have you with us today. Professor, we have been talking to many experts on air pollution, and we've had several podcasts on it. And they've all talked about how poor air quality is not only in Delhi, but several of our cities and even in rural areas. But what confuses us at this moment is how different nations and different organizations are measuring air pollution differently. In the sense, like there is WHO, the US and the Chinese and the Indian standards, just to mention a few, like Suffer, Professor Gufran Beg had come for one of the podcasts, and he mentioned that we don't measure AQI above 500, justifying that it's already a severe category, so there's no need to go above 500 in the parameterization of AQI. So why is there so much variation? I mean, are the lungs differently capacitated? I mean, different lungs have different capacities.
No, I mean, first of all, thank you for having me here. Let me clarify one thing that, what you meant by different standards. They depend on health effect estimates done in these countries or globally. Now, there is no difference in measuring air pollution levels. There are two ways actually air pollution levels can be measured from traditional, way. One is that obviously that you can use filter papers where you can collect the particles or the gases, and then you can sort of measure their concentrations in air. Or mostly now we are doing actually this online, in a sense that what we actually measure is the number concentrations. That means how many particles are there, or how many particles are there in unit volume of air, and then basically convert them for their mass concentrations. So that method is uniform across the globe. What differs are, and what you are referring to, is basically the standards. Mm-hmm. Now let me tell you how the standards are set. The ultimate air quality guideline provided by the World Health Organization, it requires epidemiological studies. That means, across the globe, several studies are conducted where the air pollution's impact on a range of diseases, all non-communicable diseases. For example, respiratory diseases, cardiovascular diseases, diabetes, stroke and lung cancer, and many others. They are systematically analyzed, and based on those studies, what was found is that if people are breathing air where the pollution level is at certain range, what should be the excess health risk?
Okay.
And when you do these studies across the globe where you have different ranges, what happens is that the risk also varies. And based on those studies, WHO has said that one particular air pollutant, which is known as PM 2.5, these are very fine particles, smaller than 2.5 micron. And just to give you a reference point, that if you take a single strand of hair, that hair is 60 to 70 micron thick. So that means you can understand how fine these particles are. So when we breathe, these particles go all the way into our body and then basically, creates all these problems. So if we breathe air where the concentration levels of these fine particles is less than 5 microgram per unit volume of air, which is averaged over the year. So that's, as of now, as the current knowledge says, is kind of safe.
Okay.
And then, because every country has a very different levels of air pollutions and they cannot meet certainly this very strict standard or guidelines, then WHO recommends that each country sets their own standard. And that's how actually the standards become different. So if you go back 50 years, then you will find the standards in US was much higher. But once you achieve first those higher standards, then you try to improve further and you go down the ladder. And eventually we try to meet this very strict standard. Now for India, in 2009, our Central Pollution Control Board has set the standard for this particular air pollutant at 40 microgram per cubic meter. WHO air quality guidelines says 5. We are 8 times higher. We are now currently revising this. And similarly for other polluters also, there are standard sets. And that is why actually the standards are very different from country to country. And once we meet this higher level, we should achieve then going down and make the standard more stringent, and then we improve the air. So that's the whole process.
So currently Delhi is around 200 to 300 PM 2.5 parameters at least. I mean, that's what I've been observing. So that's like, so much far away from even our own standards. So, what do you have to say about...
Yeah, so when I say standard, again, the standards are defined based on the annual concentrations, also for 24-hour concentrations. So for 24-hour concentration for that particular pollutant, the standard in India is 60. As you correctly said, right now we are probably 250 plus.
Yes.
Annually, Delhi is roughly around 100.
Okay.
So we have a long way to go even we meet our own standard. Many other states are also struggling to really meet this standard. And if I talk about India in general, all the North Indian state is where the problem is really, really severe.
Okay, right, Professor. Now, I'll just refer, just to take this forward, we were referring to one of your papers on satellite-based estimation of NO2 in India. And you have made estimations through satellites. Now, a very basic query. Satellites float hundreds of kilometers above the Earth. How can they measure the smallest particles, the gases at ground level? Can a satellite do that?
Yeah, that's an interesting, question. And again, satellites, they do not directly measure all of this. What the satellites measure is simply the radiation going back from the Earth and atmosphere.
Okay.
Now, based on that measurements, what we usually first do is that we try to understand how this radiation interacts with these particles or gas molecules. And then we try to derive that because typically, what happens is that when the sunlight interacts with the atmosphere, the light gets scattered by the gas molecules. Some of this is absorbed by some of the gas molecules like ozone. And then we have these particles. They either scatter or absorb depending on their chemical composition. So by measuring how much of this sunlight is getting scattered or absorbed, we first measure how much each of this pollutant is there in the entire atmosphere. Because what you are measuring from satellite is that outside the atmosphere. So what information first you derive is that the entire atmosphere what is the concentrations. Then you sort of convert, because that's not the air that we are breathing. And as you correctly pointed out that, how do you really know what is at the surface? So then you need actually much more sophisticated techniques to really convert it to the surface level concentration. So over the last 2 decades, my group has been working in developing sophisticated models and methods exactly doing this. And just to give you that we started with simple statistical techniques, and now we are using more sophisticated methods like machine learning and artificial intelligence to actually get those informations.
Okay. So you're trying to say that each character, or each gas, or each aerosol, if we may call it, or each dust particle has a different spectrum or reflection, and from those different spectrums you can actually capture what it is. Is that something very...
their nature is quite different, how they interact, and based on that, and then further you have to do lot of mathematical calculations to really figure out how much of these particles or the gas molecules are first in the entire atmosphere. That means, from the surface all the way up to the top of the atmosphere. And then you further develop methods to calculate how much is actually at the surface. So it's really complicated, because you have to understand that weather parameters, for example, also influence. So when you do all these computations, all of these factors that are driving the variability are considered.
Oh, that's very interesting, Professor. But if you had to choose, of course, you're working with satellite, so that's not a fair question. But if you had to choose between satellite data and data from ground-based instruments, what would you choose? Imagine you don't work with satellite information, but...
No, I will tell you, actually, each of these has its own strength and weakness.
Okay.
The best obvious measurements or estimates you will get using the ground-based monitors. Now, the catch is that typically, if you consider a reference grade monitor that the Central Pollution Control Board uses, which measures these pollutants real time, it costs more than 1.5 crore. One single instrument.
Oh my God.
There is a mandate, that how many such measurements are required based on the population density. And let me tell you that, in India currently, we have around 550 such real-time monitoring all across the country, only 550. And we need more than 4,000. So you can do the math. We did an estimate, and that's what that's why we are working actually with the government to use satellite data and generate complementary information. So what I always say is that, satellites are not to replace the ground monitors. They provide complementary informations.
Okay.
And what is required is that you sort of integrate both the satellite and ground-based measurements to get the full picture.
Okay. So we were speaking with Dr. K.J. Ramesh, the former DG of IMD. He talked about drone-based instrumentation, that we can employ street-wise drone-based instruments, which could be cost-effective and also give us results.
Yes.
So have you seen any use of any of these drone-based?
We did actually the drone-based measurements. But drone-based measurements are kind of... it's not really cost effective, because the cost of using drone and all actually enhances the cost. But there are sensors which are quite cost effective. They are not super costly, as I mentioned, more than a crore. So now in the market there are multiple sensors. We are working also with the sensors. So these are quite cheap. I will give you some range. Like they typically range from 20,000 to 60,000 rupees. However, these sensors need a lot of attentions. And they need frequent calibrations, because you need to really take care of the quality of the data and all. But we have shown using those kind of sensors that you can generate again complementary informations, and particularly at a very localized scale, which satellites cannot provide you, because satellites has the limitations. And then, as I said, other regulatory instruments are super costly. So that is why personally And as a researcher also, we are promoting that India should move to a hybrid monitoring system where you harness the power of the sensors, regulatory grade monitors, as well as satellites.
Satellite. So we join forces.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, I'll talk about one more paper of yours where you talked about a repository for air pollution data. Now, what do you want in this repository, and can students use it? For example, is it done? Where are we? Regarding this repository.
So, I think few years ago, NIRI, NIRI, the National Institute on Environmental Research, they developed, in fact, a repository of all the published literature, which is a fantastic effort. So this is one place where the students can get all the informations, in a sense that, whatever has been published in the last 30, 40 years on air quality, you will get at one place. So that's a really great start. I also advocate for data openness. Now, Central Pollution Control Board has made the regulatory grade monitoring data open, but again, there are a lot of it's not that easy to really it's not just getting to the data, but also there are other types of data which are required to really understand the air quality. One thing is that you measure air quality, but when you try to understand that what is actually driving that air quality, you need other types of data. I think it would be really good if actually the different types of data.
What do you mean by types of what?
Different types of data. For example, how much actually you are emitting.
Okay.
From the industries, how many cars are flying. So all of these data are available, but at different places, isolated way. So what I meant is actually that is there a way to really link all of this data, or maybe build a data portal where all of this data can be available for immediate use.
I see. That's great actually, because
That simplifies, yes.
Yeah, so there was this we just had one of the podcasts where they said 40% of Delhi's traffic actually contributes to this PM 2.5 being so high. But we were thinking that traffic is much less than 40%, So, but it seems that it's pretty, and it's getting higher and higher because the number of cars are increasing. So, but if we have all of this data, because you're right that at one place we only get AQI, but we don't get the sources of how it's impacting the AQI, what is there on the road, in the in the air. So,
and not just that. In fact, yesterday also I was participating in India Meteorological Department's 150 celebrations, and I was part of a panel where I think Dr. Soumya Swaminathan also advocated for the same thing. Even for the health data, for example, there are some health data available, although not really in a manner that we researchers need it. But there is not a single place where all of these are available. So for a researcher, or even for a common man or common a public, it's very difficult really to go to different places, bring the data, and then do the analysis to see.
Correct, Professor. So bringing to taking this forward, because you just mentioned about disease burden actually, because you talked about Swaminathan. But Professor, you have contributed to this global burden of disease study, and it identifies air pollution as a leading risk for various health concerns. Now, so we've talked about black lungs, and I was talking about Dr. Arvind Kumar and from Medanta, and he talks about how teenagers and children in Delhi now have lungs that are black, and he was shocked to see them, and that's how he started his campaign. Now, once these tiny particles reach the lungs, there is no way of cleaning it, and it is leading to many life-threatening diseases. The issue is so grave. But we are not prioritizing air pollution, and especially for children. And you worked in this area, so this disease burden on children is so high. So why are we not prioritizing air pollution as a significant risk?
Again, it's really unfortunate that we're not able to really prioritize, despite of so much evidence generated. Particularly, there are three vulnerable groups. One is the children, the second is actually the pregnant mothers, and third is the elderly populations. Coming to the children, now there is research evidence And in fact, the effect starts when actually the mother is pregnant. And then we have found that, higher exposure during pregnancy leads to all sorts of adverse birth outcomes, like that child is likely to have a low birth weight. There could be higher risk of preterm birth, miscarriage, stillbirths and all. And even when the child is born, there is a risk of developmental delay, both physical and cognitive, and a range of outcomes. In fact, our group actually showed that air pollution even is a risk for anemia.
Oh, is it?
Yes, and then for cardiovascular disease and many other diseases. Now, coming to the fact that why there is still not a sense of priority, I think general public still is not aware of the wide range of effect the air pollution has. Still, I think the broader concept is, or general perception is that it's mostly affecting our respiratory. And let me tell you, from the Global Burden of Disease study, which was, by the way, for India, it was led by Indian Council of Medical Research. We found that actually the larger share is for the cardiovascular disease, not the respiratory disease. No.
Okay.
And now there is evidence, as I said, that almost every organ in our body is affected by air pollutions. I think what is required is that with all of these studies, the risk, first of all, should be communicated very clearly to the common public. And then actually we need, because right now what we are doing is that we are simply telling that this is the air quality. We are not really communicating the associated risk.
Okay.
So people really do not connect. And typically it's a human behavior that, when you are living at such a high, baseline, where you are always seeing 200, 300 kind of numbers, even at 100, then you feel that air is good. But all other studies are showing, that actually we need to really aim to go down the ladder.
Yes, this is a very important observation you have actually made, that we don't connect data with the outcome of that data.
Yes.
So that connection is completely, that gap is, it's a
Yeah,
huge
and
gap.
because of this, wherever we made progress, if you look into the National Clean Air Program, there are many cities where air quality has improved. However, because of a lack of a proper framework, we are not able to show how much the health has improved. We can show based on models and all. But I think that is why I think it is important to have in one place, the health data and all other kinds of data to really do the connections. Because
Perfect.
all our learnings from China, US and others, that wherever air quality has improved, immediately you should see the health benefit.
You have a study you were mentioning on with NIMHANS. Is this related to any of
Women's
these?
actually we're looking into the mental health outcomes and all, but in general, I'm saying that there are a lot of studies where it is clearly shown that the moment you start improving the air quality, you start getting health benefits. But we need really a clear framework in India to do that.
Right, Professor. I want to take this opportunity to congratulate you for receiving the 2024 Devendra Lal Memorial Award from the American Geophysical Union for your pioneering work on health impacts of air pollution, particularly for India. Congratulations, Professor. So, what must be done? What must be done to get the government's attention? What must be done to get people's attention? So, what must be done?
Yeah. I think definitely we need to really strengthen the communications. And first, we have to admit that air pollution is a massive problem.
Yes.
Usually, air pollution is seen as a seasonal problem and typically also an urban problem, which is not. Over the year, air quality is bad. Yes, it significantly improves during summer compared to winter, but in general, if you see the air quality, year round the numbers are quite high, number one. And also, it's not within the cities. Everywhere. In fact, the estimates are suggesting that more than 75% of India does not breathe air according to the Indian standard. If you take the WHO air quality guideline, which I said is much, much cleaner, then almost 95% or 98% India. Except you are in Ladakh and Arunachal and those places, everywhere the air is bad. So I think we have to first accept that the condition is really grave. And then based on the current knowledge, what is important is that we need to really implement the clean air action plan. The solutions are there for every sector. I think what should be done is that clearly implement the action plans that are developed in a way that you also track progress. Currently, what is happening is that all of these things are, for example, transport, industries, households, and everything. There is a plan. People are trying to do certain things, but there are no clear internal indicators so that you can track progress. And if you are not making progress, then you do course correction. Number one, there is also no accountability.
Yes.
I think this is very, very important. And eventually, if we really communicate to the common public, then people will raise the voice and demand clean air.
Yes.
Again, this is, I think, clearly lacking in India. Nobody is talking about air pollution, and air pollution has never been, as a discussion point in any election.
That is a great point.
I
That's
think in
a
Delhi,
great
yes,
point.
people mentions that air pollution, but it's well below all other different things. I think unless we really make that happening, we'll not see. Progress is there, but it's very, very slow.
Yeah, so we've been talking to some, political people, and they've said that, we don't want to talk about something it will not resonate with the people. So they want to bring in some issues that will catch people's eye, but air pollution is not one of them. Yeah. Or for that matter, any other pollution is not one of them. You were mentioning something about the PMAY earlier. So you think that there's a connection with PMI to overall all India AQI?
Yeah, I mean, what we found is that if you take India as a whole, then in the household still people are using solid fuel. There is a significant households. And when you do the calculations, what we found is that the solid fuel use in the household is still the single largest contributor to outdoor air pollution, because when you're burning the solid fuel, the smoke goes out and pollute also outdoor air. And if
cow dung cakes and things like that?
Cow dung cakes, coal, wood, multiple things. Now, if one sector has to be prioritized, and what is basically low-hanging fruit is this particular sector. Why? Because we have already made the investment in terms of Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana. Now almost 99.5 or 6% households in India has LPG connection. However, I think mid-60, that's the percentage of households are consistently using LPG. Okay. So if we can bridge that 30% gap with a proper sustainable economic model, because LPG cylinders are quite costly, so typically poor households are not able to use it. But if we can actually drive that change, I think there will be almost 30% reduction in outdoor air pollutions. Now, obviously, in many cities, this number is smaller. But when you go to rural areas on a regional scale, I think this number is very, very important. So that's why I think we are pushing for, that transitions to happen as quickly as possible.
What is your take on transport sector?
Yeah, transport is again, very important and one of the key sectors, particularly in the urban areas. And we know by now that within transport also, the contributions from heavy duty vehicles are quite significant. In smaller towns, actually contributions from two-wheelers are quite significant. So there is a big push in the transport sector towards electric vehicle. However, we must not forget that today we are still mostly relying on coal. Unless we really make that energy transitions, no matter how much we push for EVs, it will not be sustainable. Number one. Number two is that, when we talk about transport sectors, what we do not talk about is that overall transport infrastructures. For a simple example, whenever you have congestions, the vehicles are emitting much more pollutants.
Yeah.
And in other countries, people have invested to make sure that these congestions are eased and all. So those things are also important. And then obviously you need to really go to cleaner fuel. Like in Delhi, we ensure that this happens, but not for in general other cities or other parts of the countries.
Now that brings us to our final question, Professor. So you're a very eminent professor of IIT, of course, and you're a consultant in the World Bank and the UNEP. So how much has your work been able to influence policy changes in India?
I wish it could have done much more in a sense, but obviously, whenever we do research, we want actually the research percolates and makes some effect. I have been working with various government departments, as I mentioned, like the satellite work I'm doing with the government, for the government. Similarly, through series of dialogues, we are trying to simplify science and tell the government what to do and what not to do. We made some progress, definitely, but I think we need to really make much more progress and enable all the transitions that I have been talking about.
Right, Professor, that seems like a long way, but I'm sure we are on the right track. Professor, it was a splendid discussion. Thank you once again for making time for us, and I'm sure our listeners will have many follow up questions, and we would have you back sometime once again in the near future. So, your work is exceptional, I mean, I must say, and we hope that we will bring this to a larger number of people, make more people aware of issues like this. Thank you once again, Professor, and I would now request Hiteshika to please wrap things up for this episode of our podcast.
Thank you, Dr. Shulagna Chattopadhyay, for guiding today's engaging conversation, and a big thank you to Professor Sagnik Dey. Your detailed analysis of the current situation, the urgency of a coordinated approach, and the necessary steps to protect public health have provided invaluable perspectives on addressing this great concern. As we conclude, it's clear that air pollution is a public health crisis that demands urgent action. Let's stay engaged and push for the change needed to protect our future. Thanks for tuning in to The Air We Fear on the GNY Live. Stay informed, stay motivated, and let's breathe life into the cleaner world. Until next time.